This is a production of Cornell University.
Today's seminar is an experiment. Our graduate students requested that we go to a more casual format to foster community spirit. So we've turned today's time slot over to them. Take it away, Tristan.
Thanks, Gillian. I'm going to share my screen. Gillian's right. Today is a trial of a very discussion-based and hopefully lively seminar. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to see that there are so many people online today. This is our first plant pathology luncheon. This is a fun and enjoyable time where we can have a lively discussion on a variety of topics. So since the start of the pandemic, we've noticed that many of our traditional ways of casual interactions, our coffee breaks, social events, general hallway talk have been reduced or stopped altogether. And our goal is to help recreate these casual spaces for folks in plant pathology to talk and share their ideas, not unlike a conversation. These conversations would be typically centered around, but is not limited to, topics that are presented on, and we think this is one way we can increase our community engagement. We'll treat this as a very casual and fun seminar. So how do these luncheons work? Unlike typical presentations, don't be afraid to ask questions, make comments, or respond to comments in the chat during the presentation. Treat the chat like you would a forum. Alternatively, you can also raise your hand and share your ideas verbally. I can give a short pause after each idea or slide to help. And lastly, we want to remind you that this is our first time trying something of a more interactive seminar format. And we are seeing these kinds of luncheons to be a good addition to our section. So we appreciate your patience and we encourage you to engage and talk. I am also aware that other departments at Cornell and other institutions have a similar allotted time when departments come together and talk about subjects ranging from research projects to imposter syndrome to other random experiences and encounters. If there's something that you think would be a helpful change to this format, we'd love to hear from you. In the spirit of community engagement, I'd like to define what community is. A group of people connected by interests, values, or goals that communicate with and relate to one another. There is no requirement for all of us to be in the same room or building. So by this definition, we can see that we can still maintain a community while still socially distancing, especially with technology today. Community just looks different. And with every week bringing uncertainty, relationships and community have the power to bring support and reliability into our daily lives. In 2012, the New York Times published an article called "Why is it hard to make friends over 30?" Our situation being in a pandemic is obviously more complex than simply making friends. But I believe that the efforts of what we put into maintaining long-lasting friendships is transferable to maintaining a robust community. The topic is timeless, such so that the New York Times actually ran the same piece again several years later. In the piece, the article talks about the difficulty in maintaining friendships and the conditions that sociologists have said are important for maintaining close relations. Those three elements are repeated unplanned interactions, proximity, and settings that allow people to let their guard down and confide in each other. These are elements that can be hard to come by right now, We may not be living close to each other, but sometimes it doesn't feel that way. And I'm sure most of our virtual interactions are in a very much planned and formal format. And this is why I think it is a good idea to remind ourselves the importance of keeping in touch outside formal meetings. Casual conversation is a good venue for coming up with new ideas, building trust, and taking a step from being just coworkers to being community members. I remember once running into Mary McKellar on the third floor, who was decked out in her magical mushroom uniform, herding students to the hostorium to try delicious corn smut. And I think we were remarking about how delightful it was to see adventurous students try corn smut. Seeing students encouraged to try something outside the comfort zone, and it really inspired me. And I remember lugging a bowl of leftover corn smut to my friends across campus who've never even heard of smut before. And that bowl eventually made its way to a professor in engineering who absolutely loved it. This was obviously before pre-COVID sanitation standards. And this entire experience of sharing made me genuinely feel like I was a part of a greater interconnected community. And it started with just a happenstance hallway conversation with Mary. I've seen great examples of faculty, staff, and students and friends supporting each other in our section, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Our community is rich and vibrant and dependable. And I also want to put in a plug-in so that if you want to set the topic for our next luncheon, which can be on anything, research or not, we would love to hear from you. And with that, I would love to transition over to a good friend and fellow graduate student, Juliana.
Thank you, Tristan. Can you hear me well?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So I'll share my screen. But first, I'd like to say hi to everyone. I'm super honored that I'm kicking off these semester's seminars. I had no idea this was ever going to happen to me. So I'm happy to be here. And also, I'm very happy to be part of this new initiative that the GSA designed for all of us. So can you see my screen right now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So, well, when Tristan and Tori reached out to me, they said that they were interested in talking a little bit about, science communication, especially right now during the pandemic. And I'll explain to you all in a second why I had a recent experience related to this. And that's why I'm here today. And this is very relaxed. I have some interactive slides that I hope they work. If they don't work, we can just use the chat, but just as Tristan said, feel free to interrupt me. Write down. Oops, it changed in the chat. I'm not sure if I'll be able to see it, but Tristan can help me with that if you write some things during the presentation, and just to stop or talk in a very relaxed manner. So I decided to pick up this title, Communicating Science. It's not only about the message. For all of you that don't know me, my name is Juliana. I am a second year PhD grad student at Melanie Filatrot's lab. I usually work with Dikia Dadanti and, small RNAs and other things related to that fascinating pathogen. But today, we're not going to talk about research. We're going to talk about something different. Um, so to start off, you all know, this pandemic, right? So this is a picture of Cornell Health, and these are just two other pictures that I found online related to the pandemic. But I recently came more aware that there's another pandemic that's burdening us all. And that's what people have started to call an infodemic. At first I was not very familiar with the term, but perhaps you have come across it recently. And I was doing a little bit of research about it, and it seems like it has been around since 2003. David Rothkopf in the Washington Post published, yeah, I think it was an editorial back then, talking actually about the SARS virus, not the SARS-CoV-2, but the original SARS that we knew around 2003. And he was talking about this new situation where people were receiving so much information regarding a disease that could be, very bad for them and their families, and that was beginning to make it harder to actually control a public health crisis, just because everybody was receiving so much information and was getting confused, and like, uh, you know confusion leads to fear, and then when you are afraid of something, you cannot deal with it correctly. So that happened in 2003, and I guess it has been around also in some other things, but it was not very noticeable until recently last year. The director of WHO mentioned it again at a press conference, of course, talking about COVID-19 this time. He said, we're not just fighting an epidemic, we're fighting an infodemic. So it has been sort of renewed, or its use had been changed right now, and people are using it a lot to refer to these outstanding amount of information that we're all receiving, like in the news, social media, or just like talking with each other. I don't know if you have this some experience, but at least at the beginning, when I was jumping into Zoom calls with friends that were supposed to be like, relaxing scenarios, sometimes it turned to be like everybody was just talking about what's happening right now. And that's logical because that's something that we're all feeling and we're all living. So when I was preparing these slides, I decided to use Google Trends to sort of get an idea of how much the terms vaccines or COVID-19 vaccine have been Googled in the last year. And as you see here, when we get closer and closer to 2021, both terms start picking up. And this is just the same example in Spanish. And you'll see why I did it in Spanish as well in a second. So it looks like late December, early, February, and right now, of course, we're having this peak of people trying to read about these topics on Google, because it's the moment where, it was advertised and it was in the news that Pfizer and Moderna got their vaccines out there and, started vaccinating people. This is just a distribution of like the countries where the different terms that are researched more. So I found two things interesting from this exercise. First, what I was telling you, like this, there's this peak around the end of the year, early 2021, and then also if you compare both terms in English, people are looking more for the specific COVID-19 vaccine. Well, if you search for the same terms just translated to Spanish, people are usually just looking for the term vaccines more than they are looking for COVID-19 vaccine. And I found that interesting, and I'll explain why in a second, based on the recent experience that I've had. So I started feeling this surge of information related to the vaccines, as I said, in December and January. But in order to explain what happened to me, I just wanted to say a little bit more about me so that you can understand the whole context. So for those of you who don't know, I'm originally from Colombia, which is here. This is just a picture of Bogota, the city where I was born and lived all my life before I came here. And in my specific case, I have a very big family. So both on my mom's side and on my dad's side, I have a lot of uncles, aunts, cousins. Well, and I know this is not that common, maybe here in the US, but in Colombia and in other Latin American countries, people really use WhatsApp, the cell phone app, as a texting, app. They don't really send text messages, rather they just use the app. Much more than I have seen people using it here. And it has happened during the whole pandemic, but mostly end of 2020, early 2021, that people have been sending chains of messages. So it's like this message that you build up, you send it, and if people find it interesting, they will forward it to their contacts. And this became fake news chains in most parts. So I'm just like, I found some examples here. They're all in Spanish, and my intention is not for you to understand all of it, but just see the amount of information that can be rotating in people's phones, that they're receiving from, their family, their friends, in these WhatsApp groups of like 50 people where the whole family is there. So grandma, aunts, cousins, everybody's there. They're sharing information that is not, most cases it's not scientifically correct, and even in some cases it can be dangerous. um, both related to the vaccines and also related to things that people can drink, or well, telling people to drink different things to deal with the virus, things like that. So at first I was trying to ignore this just because I was like, it makes no sense. But then I started realizing that my family was actually believing it, and that some of them were even taking actions towards it. So either not wanting to get vaccine without real information about it, or drinking things that they shouldn't drink to control the virus. um, and that really struck me, because we'll go to this poll in a second, because I was usually just bombarded with scientific information while they were being bombarded with social media information or fake news information. So before we continue with this story, I designed this poll. I hope it works. You could either vote in the link, or you can text this first to get inside the poll and then send the response. I would just like to know, how frequently are you receiving information about the COVID-19 vaccines via social media? So I was talking about WhatsApp, but there's also Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of this. I will be interested in seeing if I'm seeing a similar pattern among this group that we have here as the one I've been feeling. So, Tristan, are you able to vote? Oh, yeah, somebody is voting. Perfect. Yay! Okay, I'll just give a couple of seconds to see what happens. Um, but yeah, definitely for me, it has been, I will say I will vote more than once per day. But that might be because I have different social media accounts. But anyway, if I just had one, it will probably be also more than once per day. Okay, well, this sounds good. So for people that have voted until now, we are all receiving once per day or even more than once per day. Now, I'm just going to leave you a second in this slide while I activate the next question so that it works out as well. Let me go back to the presentation. Oops. Okay. Can you see this one right now? Yep.
Yep.
I hope it works. I just activated. Has this information affected your decision on whether to get the vaccine or not? Oh, yep, it works. Perfect. Okay, so we have no. We'll just wait a couple of seconds. Yep. Okay. And this can be, like either side. Like, I didn't want to get it, now I'm getting it, or I wanted to get it and now I'm not getting it. I just want to see how much this type of information impacts people's decisions. Okay. Good. So it looks like most of the cases it's not impacting the decision, but in some of them are. And this is exactly the same trend I was seeing either, with my family and when I was reaching out to close friends. So let me see if I can change to the next slide. Oops. Here, this one. Okay, so now finally, after all this story, why I'm talking to you today. As I was saying, I had been receiving scientific information, but I noticed that my family and friends were receiving other type of information. And that type of information that they were receiving sometimes made facts change into myths or made the information less clear for them. So I have a little bit of experience in scientific communication. I was just wanting to remembering Morgan and Andrea. Morgan, as you all remember, she was super involved in programs as a Skype a scientist, where you talk to kids from different schools, and then during the pandemic, they were even doing it with families about science, about your expertise. And then with Andrea, we both work in Women in Ag Science, which is a coalition to promote literally women that work in the agricultural sciences and to like uplift each other and just communicate these type of topics to a general public. So I had a little bit of expertise, but I was not, expertise in talking about COVID or the vaccines. So I decided to record a video. It was an 8-minute video in Spanish just for my family and my friends, explaining the things that I thought were most important about the RNA COVID vaccines, especially because, this is a new technology for, the general public, and it has elicited so many myths and lies relating to it. But you know how sometimes internet works, and video went viral in Colombia and some other Latin American countries. This is the Instagram one, but it was similar in Twitter and Facebook. And I was like, what is going on? So it was a good experience, and I could, talk with so many different groups about it. But anyway, it was like just making me realize how much people are lacking information, at least in Spanish, that comes from a trustworthy source, like not me, but just like the CDC or WHO or things like that. And I'm just like a bridge translating that to a more approachable language for everybody. So this made me think, how successful are fake news? Like, is this really a thing? And I found two, I'm not going to share a lot of data, but I found two articles that I found interesting. This is from 2018. It was published in Science. And they found that fake news are being replicated in social media almost like 6 times faster than real, like truthful news. And then they conclude that the reason why, well, they hypothesize that there might be two reasons why this is said. One being like fake news seem more novel than truthful news. They just like seem more exciting in a sense. And then also fake news, for the way they are written or the language that they're using, sometimes they are eliciting feelings on the public that are more intense than the ones that truthful news can elicit. So people feel more, even, and I mean, if it's excitement or if it's anger or if it's fear, and that feeling makes them want to share that, and that's why probably it has been disseminating so fast. And then this other paper, this was more recent in 2020. This was about Facebook at the beginning of the pandemic, and they found out that 98 million pieces of information were actually misinformation that had been on Facebook for almost the first year of the pandemic, yeah, like the first months. And at the end, I mean, after this study was published, Facebook had to take down all this information that was available there for people to get, scared and confused about the topic. So give me a second, don't vote yet. I have to activate that one as well. But before we go to the last part of the talk, and then we can just start, discussing this if somebody wants to speak up. Um, I wanted to see how many of you have been trying or wanting or needing, just how many of you have felt the necessity to explain the science of these vaccines to close ones. Okay, so we have some votes for my family, a lot of votes for family and friends, and some of you that haven't felt this need, which is also good. Uh, in some conversations that I've had with my friends from the United States, I've realized that maybe the information here is much more approachable in English than it is in Spanish, and that could also be a reason why some of you don't really need the feeling the need to explain them, because maybe your family already understands how they work and they have enough information to make an informed decision about getting the vaccine or not. Okay, but it looks like most of you do feel the need or have been feeling the need to talk to family and friends about this. And I know this is hard. I know sometimes we want to explain our science, not even the vaccines, but the other things we do in a approachable language, and that becomes hard. The slight, doubt in our voice, or just like using concepts that are a little bit out of the people's normal language, could literally lead them to not believe in us or not want to listen to us anymore. So, with all this in mind, and with the things that I've learned during this month since that video was out, I decided to pick up 5 things that I think are really important or have been important for me. And maybe it will help you that are trying to communicate this type of topics to your family. So, the first thing that I was going to mention, and I already sort of skimmed through it, is the language barrier. When I was starting to explain this to my family, I found that the most useful information and clear information out there was in English. And I was able to understand that and then communicate that in a different language to my family and friends, but that's not necessarily the case for everybody. Um, this is just an example of how the CDC and the FDA's FAQ web pages look like. It's super accessible, and you can just go and see, oh, does this vaccine change my DNA? No, and then explains in a very short way why. But that's not exactly the same in Spanish, and I've seen, Twitter, like other languages, people have been trying to translate this type of information to their own native language so that they can make it more approachable to their own families and their own communities back home. This is just an example of the types of things that Colombia started to do very recently. So this was January 15, and this was, I think, like last week. So I guess after, in part after my video came out and some other science communicators started talking about this in Colombia, then the official entities started to produce a more approachable thing than it was before. But even now, it's not absolutely approachable as it is here in some cases. Then I found this paper that I thought was interesting as well. This is not a paper, this is a news article. They were talking about the language barriers that can add a problem when taking care of COVID patients that do not speak English, or vaccinating people here in the US that do not speak English. And I know this not exactly refers to the same that I was telling, because it's more focused to people that are living in an English speaking country as the United States, but it does reflect this huge problem and this like huge delay of information in different languages that are not English. And that's why, this whole other world outside of the United States probably is going to take much more longer. Well, and also the United Kingdom, it's probably going to take much more longer to get all their population or most of their population vaccinated if there's not adequate information out there. I don't know if you have seen this example, but in Israel, they're almost done, I think, with vaccinating most of the first phase people, because they did like these infographics and like short clips that they played on national television in their own language every night, months before the vaccines even arrived, just educating people for that when the vaccines did arrive, they were prepared to make that decision. And then the last thing of this part is like, even when something is in your own language, that doesn't mean that you may understand it completely. And that relates me back to what I was briefly mentioning about the terminology that you use to talk about this to your family or to your friends. Even the terms that seem easiest to us can completely confuse a person that's outside of, a scientific nucleus of people. So, for example, with the messenger RNA vaccines, we have several terms that are not common for most people. So, um, you know, nanoparticles or lipids or even RNA and DNA. I found a lot of people, at least back in Colombia, being like, I have no idea what that means. Like, I have an idea, but I cannot explain it or understand it fully to people. So, what I found useful, and you can use this too when explaining it to your family and friends, is just look for something that's common for them in their real life that can explain as an analogy what you're referring to. So, for example, when I was talking about proteins, I was, leading to talk about the spike protein that the vaccines are targeting, then I just said, proteins are just like bricks that build our body up. So we need all these bricks for our functions. They make up our hair, they make up our skin, things like that. Or, for example, when I was trying to explain why lipid nanoparticles are included in the vaccine, I try to say, they're like vehicles for the RNA. So they're like, you have to put it inside something, otherwise it will just degrade. So it's like part of the idea is to protect it and move it safely from one place to another. Um, and then I think this was the one that helped people maybe most when I was trying to explain what the DNA is and what RNA is. What I was saying is like, imagine you are doing a recipe. So you're on your kitchen and you're trying to make a dessert, for example. So then you can think of the DNA as sort of your recipe book, but then you are going to build just one of those desserts. So analogy, you're just going to have one protein produced. But you cannot just read the recipe and make the dessert. You have to read the recipe, transcript that into a different paper, and then from that paper you make the dessert. And I was trying to explain that paper, that like transition, would be what the messenger RNA is doing for us in this specific case. So of course I know, like, if you think of the deep science in it, I'm leaving so many things outside, but sometimes people just need a very clear example of how the process works and how that translates into what the vaccine does in their bodies. Um, and then for the another thing that I found very interesting is that it's hard when people are not trusting the message per se. So it's different to talk about things that are maybe less like hot topics right now. But right now, talking about the vaccines is a super hot topic and it has a lot of distrust. I found these data when I was preparing the slides. This is from here, from the US, and I think it's good because it's telling us that um, after December and after all these infographics and all this information start to go out to people, most there's a bigger proportion of people that want to get vaccinated or will get vaccinated as soon as they can. But there's also always people that are not getting it, and that it's I think that's respectable if they're taking that decision in an informed way. So if they're not basing their decision on fake news, but rather on the real information, they're just deciding not to do it. And this is in Spanish, so I'm just going to quickly point out the things that are important. A similar, poll was made in Colombia, and they asked people if they were going to get it or not, and if not, well, why would it be the reason? And the biggest amount said that they would not get it because they're afraid of very dangerous potential side effects. And all these very dangerous potential side effects that they have been seeing, social media, WhatsApp, things like that, telling them that they will get their DNA altered or that they would get really, really sick or, things like that. So this is important when you're trying to communicate something related to science to people from the general public, but specifically right now, take into account that the message per se might be distrusted and it's not you, it's just the message. So you have to make an extra effort to make that seem more easy to communicate. And I was thinking, like, even in other topics that are a little bit controversial, so talking about CRISPR and editing genomes, all the ethical things that could be behind that, talking about GMOs, which is a little bit even more closer to what we do, and then climate change. So there are a lot of things that are very hot topic right now, and that you might feel the need or want to talk about that with your friends and family. So always remember that since the topics have these like pre placed distrust on them, you have to like even be like the deal maker. So I thought about it like, even if the message is a little bit conflicting, if you are a good communicator and you inspire trust, then you can sort of like change the balance on whether people are trusting the message or not, or whether people want to listen to you and the message or not. And that took me like how much trust in the messengers that are telling these messages. So I have different messengers here. This is Fauci, you all know. Maybe you don't, not maybe not all of you know her. This is Dr. Kizzy Corbett. She's the lead scientist on the Moderna vaccine, and she's awesome. She's doing a science communication processing her social media as well, and she has a specifically targeted, like Black communities and why she's helping them earn trust in the vaccines. So both, developing trust in the message, but also being a trusty messenger are very important. In this case, I don't know if you saw, but this last week, the Pope got his second dose of the vaccine. And at least in Colombia, which is a country that's very religious, all these grandmas that were not even listening about the vaccine, now they're starting to listen about the information because they saw somebody that they have in a very, very high esteem take it. So it's just opening doors for people to discuss and talk about things that maybe they were super close to talk about before. Well, and this is Bill Gates that, as you might have seen the fake news, there's like this super fake news saying that Bill Gates is going to put microchips in the vaccines. And that has been a big thing why people don't want to get it. So, you have both things in the balance, like if the messenger will help or maybe the messenger will not help transmitting the message. And for me personally, what I've seen and what people have told me after my video was like they like to see a scientist that is like very like simple in a way. Like they're not seeing me like as these super high scientist that they cannot approach, but rather they see me like a normal citizen that has science education and might be able to translate things that maybe they cannot fully understand on their own. So if you're talking to your family, use that, as a help for you. They love you and they will listen to you if you're like approaching them in a nice and, calm manner. And then the last thing is there's this huge issue of healing the trust of people in science. Actually, yesterday I was in a small workshop with the people from Women in Ag Science that I mentioned before. We were talking about this, and I just started writing down the words that they were saying about the topic because I thought it would make sense for today. And they were talking about, why is there distrust in science? Well, there's so many reasons, like society wise, there are reasons behind that. Um, Science itself is a process, and sometimes people want the answers to be like right away and like 100% sure, and you all know that that's not always the case. So that sometimes generates more uncertainty than certainty. But in general, there are so many things that are behind, and I think that even if each scientist in the world decided to communicate their science a little bit more, it will be a help. And in general, we'll eventually reach to a point where people will feel more, at least more able and more willing to listen to scientists and what they have to say. And yeah, and finally, I was just going to say there's a lot being done, especially right now with the COVID vaccines. I don't know if you saw Rob, he's also a PhD student at Cornell. I think he's biomed, maybe. And something really similar happened to him. Funny thing is that I had no idea of his existence until after my video came out and people sent me his. But he did something very similar. He just grabbed a board and started explaining how the messenger RNA vaccines worked in a very simple manner. He's in English, of course, because he wanted to tell his family, and it went super viral here as well. And there's other people talking about this in Spanish. That's what I've been mostly targeting for, and like looking for people that are doing something similar. Then, for example, in Colombia, the government started bringing up things that were more useful, were more like an infographic and not like a 90-page Word document that people were not going to read. And I've seen a lot of this in English, so I think that's also something that you can share with your own family if you feel like maybe you need some help when explaining about this. But even though there's a lot being done, I think, it's just something that each one of us can do. If we double check stuff, don't share absolutely everything we receive, fully read the things before we share them, then we can eventually help flatten this curve of misinformation. And also because this whole experience made me realize how much impact our own publications can have. Like I literally just thought about my family and it reached out like 200,000 people. So your own retweets and your own forwards or your own conversation with your grandma can make a huge difference in these and other topics. Yeah, I was just wanted to use this last slide to say that and to hopefully inspire you a little bit to talk about this and other topics with people that want to talk about them. Yeah, so that's just like how my profile looks now after all this experience. You can go there if you want to follow. But aside from that, I think it will be interesting if we can talk a little bit. I think we have some minutes, so if people want to say things in the chat or just like speak up, or Tristan, if you want to say something, that will be also cool.
That was an excellent talk. I think we should all give Juliana a round of applause.
Thank you.
Virtually or through icons.
I think, Juliana, you're a natural at giving the first presentation.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Touched on a topic that I feel strongly about, and that is it's our responsibility to talk science to non-scientists and to find ways of doing that. COVID is very serious, but biology is serious. And we have to have a basic level of understanding in order for the general population to appreciate the gravity of a pandemic, for example.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely agree on that.
Yeah, earlier in your presentation, you made the point about how Israel sort of primed a lot of their population with information about COVID to get them ready to talk about the vaccine. And sometimes I forget that it can take some time for information, like correct information, to be absorbed by a population. I keep thinking that like the vaccine will come out and then like, oh, I can just tell people about it then, and then they'll believe me or they won't.
Yeah.
But sometimes it takes time.
Yeah, it takes time, and people also want to like see it in different places, like not only you telling them, but maybe you are like the first step they take towards understanding a topic. So for example, my mom, after we talked about this, she every like couple of days she has been sending me more stuff. She's like, oh, I saw this, and like on her own she's like educating herself on the topic. And I think that's a huge win, that people like, maybe not for COVID, but later on, they really want to understand science and biology. And on their own, they will start reading and looking for places to understand that a little bit more.
Hey, Juliana. Very
Hey,
nice talk.
Gary.
How are you?
Thank you. Good.
I just wondered, you may have mentioned in your talk, but I wondered if you've had a chance to connect with Cornell Alliance for Science, because you have, that's good. Because
No, I haven't, but I had it in my mind.
You should, because there's a lot of commonality between what you're talking about here, and they have some really splendid educational materials, resources that they're developing for some of these very topics. So if you get a chance, I
Yeah.
think you enjoy engaging with that group.
That's
all I wanted to say,
absolutely
but wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the advice. What do you think, Tristan? Oh, go ahead.
I have a question, Juli.
Hi, Adam.
Hey, so do you have any plans to start producing videos on like, topics in plant pathology, for example?
Yeah, so at first I thought all these people that were starting to ask me questions were only interested about COVID, and I was a little bummed, like, oh, I don't want to keep talking about COVID forever. But I've realized that they are interested in everything, and they actually started asking me, like, what exactly do you do? So I started telling, like, I work with plants that get sick, making short videos about that, showing how symptoms look like. And there's a lot of interest out there. So of course, I mean, I'm a PhD student. I don't have so many times that other science communicators have to talk and do videos and do stuff. But yeah, I'll definitely try to start doing things. I was thinking, all these people, if we can explain them very simple things like CRISPR, for example, but in a simple term, it will be very nice for them to get that type of information. So yeah, hopefully.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Thanks.
I just wanted to comment a little, not so much on the topic, but on our method of this luncheon. Is I really liked the polls that you had that allowed us to interact like while you were talking. But I think if anybody else has opinions on how to get everyone who's currently on the Zoom call more engaged, we'd be looking for those inputs as well.
Yeah, that will be nice. This was an experiment, as Gillian said, so it's nice to have more ideas.
Yeah, we'll have another trial again in April, and I think we might make a few changes, but I like how things are going. We're getting close to 1:15. So if there are no more questions, I think this would be a good stopping point.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University. on the web at cornell.edu.